"You're not going tonight."
It's our
The
little
words weren't
secret.
loud. They weren't angry. They weren't even meant to command. They were whispered, close enough that I felt the warmth of her breath brush the side of my neck, close enough that my thoughts stalled mid-motion like a car hitting black ice. I had already picked up my jacket. My keys were already in my hand. I'd already told myself this night would be simple. Walk out, clear my head, forget the weight that had been pressing on my chest for weeks. But that whisper unraveled everything. It didn't sound like a request. It didn't sound like a threat. It sounded like certainty. And certainty is dangerous when it comes from someone who knows you better than you know yourself. I froze there in the doorway, heart beating too fast for the silence we were standing in. The room behind us dim, except for the soft yellow lamp by the couch. I didn't turn around right away. I couldn't. Turning around would mean acknowledging that she had power in that moment. And I wasn't ready to admit that. The night had started so normally. Too normally. Dinner leftovers on the table. The hum of the refrigerator filling gaps in conversation. The kind of quiet that sneaks into shared spaces when words have been exhausted but feelings haven't. She'd been watching me all evening. I realized now, tracking my movements without making it obvious. The way I avoided her eyes. The way I kept checking the time. The way my leg bounced when I sat. She always noticed those things. That was her problem. Or maybe it was mine. I cleared my throat, trying to sound casual, trying to pretend her whisper hadn't just knocked the air out of my lungs. I told her I was just stepping out for a bit, that I needed space, that I'd be back later. Lies wrapped in reason always sound convincing until someone who knows the truth hears them. She stepped closer. I felt it before I heard it, the shift in air, the subtle pressure of presence. "You've been leaving a lot lately," she said, her voice calm, almost gentle. "Every time things get heavy." I finally turned to face her then, and for a second I wished I hadn't. There was no anger in her eyes, no accusation, just understanding, and somehow that was worse. Understanding meant she wasn't guessing. She knew. I asked her why it mattered, why tonight was any different. She didn't answer right away. She reached out, not to grab my arm, not to block the door, just to rest her fingers lightly against my wrist, right where my pulse was betraying me. "Because tonight," she whispered, "if you leave, you won't come back the same." The words landed, heavier than anything she could have shouted. I laughed weakly, the kind of laugh people use when they're trying to outrun fear. I told her she was overthinking, that she was reading into things, that it was just a night. But my body wasn't listening to my mouth. My hand loosened around the keys. My shoulders sagged. She saw it instantly. She always did. She moved past me then, closing the door herself, slow and deliberate, the click of the lock echoing louder than it should have. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't forceful. It was intimate, like she was sealing us into a moment neither of us could escape. "Sit," she said softly, nodding toward the couch. I should have pushed back. I should have insisted. But instead I sat, because part of me had been waiting for someone to stop me from running. The couch dipped under my weight, the familiar fabric grounding and suffocating at the same time. She didn't sit right away. She stood in front of me, arms crossed loosely, studying me like a puzzle she'd almost finished solving. "You're afraid," she said. Not a question. I scoffed. Denial is easy when fear doesn't have a shape yet. She shook her head slightly. "Not of me," she added. "Of what happens if you stay." That hit too close. I looked away, jaw tightening. Staying meant confronting things I'd buried. Staying meant conversations that didn't end with doors closing. Staying meant admitting that the restlessness inside me wasn't caused by the world outside, but by something broken and unspoken within. She finally sat beside me, close enough that our shoulders touched. She didn't lean into me. She didn't demand eye contact. She just waited. Silence stretched, thick and heavy, but not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that asks questions without speaking. I don't know how long we sat there before I spoke. Time does strange things when you stop running from it. I told her I didn't know who I was becoming, that every day felt like I was drifting further from the person I used to recognize, that leaving at night made it easier not to think. She listened without interrupting, without trying to fix me. And that somehow made it harder to keep talking. When I finally ran out of words, she rested her head lightly against my shoulder. "You don't have to go to escape," she said. "You can stay and still breathe." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But belief requires trust, and trust requires balance. And her whisper had already knocked me off mine. I asked her what she was really afraid of. She exhaled slowly, as if she'd been holding that breath all evening. "That one night," she said, "you'll walk out, and whatever you're chasing will convince you not to come back." I swallowed, because part of me knew she was right. We sat there suspended between leaving and staying, between fear and comfort, between the man I was and the man I might become. And in that quiet, with her presence steady beside me, I realized something unsettling. Her whisper hadn't just stopped me from going out. It had forced me to confront the fact that I didn't actually know where I was going anymore. And that realization scared me more than the night ever could. If you're still listening right now, take a moment, because stories like this aren't just about characters. They're about the moments we all face when someone's words make us pause, reflect and choose differently. If you want more stories that dig into those quiet, powerful moments that change everything, make sure you subscribe to the channel. This is only the beginning. And what happens next will shift everything you think you understand about control, connection, and the cost of staying. The night didn't end the way I thought it would. There was no dramatic confrontation, no sudden clarity that fixed everything. Instead, it unfolded slowly, like a truth peeling itself open, layer by layer. We stayed on that couch long after the city outside slipped into deeper darkness, the occasional car passing like a reminder that the world was still moving, even though we weren't. Her head rested against my shoulder, steady and warm, while my thoughts raced in every direction, colliding with memories I'd tried to outrun for years. I realized then that leaving had become my habit, not because I needed freedom, but because I feared stillness. Stillness leaves room for questions, and questions demand answers. She broke the silence eventually, her voice barely louder than the hum of the fridge. "Do you remember the first night you didn't run?" she asked. I frowned, searching my memory. She smiled faintly, already knowing the answer. "You don't," she said, "because you didn't even notice it then. You just stayed, and everything didn't fall apart." Her words sank in deeper than I expected. I had spent so much time preparing for collapse that I hadn't noticed how many times I'd survived simply by staying put. I asked her why she hadn't stopped me before. "Why tonight?" She shifted, turning slightly so she could look at me, really look at me. "Because now," she said, "you're standing at a point where leaving doesn't just give you space, it changes who you come back as." That scared me, not because it was dramatic, but because it was honest. I admitted something then that I'd never said out loud, that when I left at night, I wasn't always sure I wanted to come back. Not to her specifically, but to this version of my life. The words tasted bitter, but once spoken, they lost some of their power over me. She didn't flinch. She didn't pull away. She nodded slowly, as if she'd already made peace with the possibility. "That's why I whispered," she said. "If I'd shouted, you would have fought me. If I'd begged, you would have felt trapped. But a whisper makes you listen." I laughed quietly despite myself. She was right. She always had been. We stood up together then, not to go anywhere, but to move, to prove that staying didn't mean being stuck. She made tea, a simple, familiar routine that grounded the moment. As we stood in the kitchen, shoulders brushing, I felt something shift inside me, not relief, not happiness, but balance. The kind that comes when you stop leaning so hard in one direction. I realized that control had never been about her stopping me from leaving. It was about me choosing not to disappear. Later, as the night stretched toward morning, I understood the real